everyone, and welcome to the iterative structure. Okay, couple things. Now that hopefully you feel confident about continuing on with this course, it's time for us to now get into the first piece of what's going to be an eventful semester in regards to everything you're going to be learning. One of the main things you're going to be learning is this thing called the iterative structure. Matter of fact, just about every program you write this semester will have the iterative structure in it. If you recall, we did not have the iterative structure in anything in Programming 1. We did that on purpose because we wanted to focus on it primarily in Programming 2 and also just take away one less thing to learn in Programming 1. Up to this point, we've learned about the three structures of programming. You should know by now there's three structures of programming called sequential, conditional, and now iterative. Iterative deals with doing something over and over again until a condition is met, or a certain amount of times, or so on, or while a condition exists, I should say. So that's kind of what we talk about today. And then what we're going to do this week is learn about how to apply this. And then, like I said, your first couple times in applying it, you're going to say, "Ooh, that was different, that was tricky." But I promise you, you're going to practice this so much over the remaining weeks of this course, it's going to be old hat. And learning how to apply it will be something that you'll do very, very easily. Okay? So the iterative structure, we're going to understand the concept of the iterative structure. We're going to understand the different types of iteratives, the do loop, the do until, the for next. Understand the concept of what an infinite loop is all about, and then understand pre-test and post-test loops. Okay? And so let's get started. The iterative structure is the final of the three structures. We kind of already talked about that, okay? The structure allows for execution of a specific task continuously for a certain amount of times until a condition exists and while a condition exists, all right? The iterative structure I find in being a professor in this for quite a while now and teaching many students. I think I'm up to, I don't know, I think the last time I counted about 8,000 students have gone through my program since I've been here. Is probably one of the hardest ones to grasp. And it's hard because you're trying to somehow, I don't know, how can I explain this? Somehow kind of, sticking it in and hoping that it works. Where in this case, you really need to just see the logic and almost say the words and not try to force feed it. An iterative structure is a combination of two things. Number one, a conditional structure, and then really the iterative part of it. I know that's really bad explanation. The iterative meaning I'm going to loop, but you're going to do that until a condition is either met or while it exists in most cases, okay? So you just kind of got to see what you're trying to do. I always tell people, by applying this, and we'll play this when we kind of get into this, when we do our example for this week, when you're programming and you're finding you're doing the same task over and over again, or you need to do the same task over and over again, voila, you got the situation for a loop, and that's how you kind of get used to it. As I mentioned before, we pushed off the idea of doing the iterative structure in Programming 1, and one of the main reasons why I decided to do that was because there really wasn't any great example on why we would be doing the iterative structure. You're not going to find that this week. The examples we'll be doing are fun, yet you don't program these like this very often. What you mainly use the iterative structure for is array processing, which we will get into, string manipulation processing, which almost in a way is the same thing you will find out, and database processing, result set processing. All three of these we're going to spend a lot of time on in this course. And so that's why it seemed to make more sense to push everything off for the iterative structure until now. All right, anyway, a lot of talking, and I need to go explain what this stuff's all about. I just want to make sure you understand why we're doing this now and how you're going to apply it. You're going to apply it throughout the entire course, okay? There's three different types of structures, okay, that you'll find in most programming languages. There's a do until, pre-test, post-test, a do while, pre-test, post-test, and a for next loop. Each language has a little bit of a variations of these. As a matter of fact, some languages you don't see do untils. Mostly you see do whiles. And for next, there's a lot of different variations of those in other languages. But again, doing this in Visual Basic is really clean, really easy to look at. And I think once you get this, you'll be able to pick these up in other languages really quick. I mean, you might have to figure out how to write a loop in another language, which might be a little bit different, but that's all you got to really ask for. How do I write a loop in Python? How do I write a loop in C? And it's not much different than how you're going to do it in Visual Basic. Okay, syntactically, it might look a little bit different, but all in all, it's the same thing. All right? Let's look how it kind of works. This is a do until loop. I don't want to say Visual Basic is the only language that uses these. I might be saying that incorrectly, but a do until is very common. I don't see it a lot. I should say it's common in Visual Basic. I don't see it a lot in other languages like C, Python, and so on. But it works. And how this kind of works is this. And make sure, let's look how this works. This is a structure, just like an if, then, else, end if structure. This is a structure. Do until some condition. A condition becomes part of this. So you're going to do till x equals y. You're going to do till, I don't know, end of file. You're going to do until whatever it is you're going to be, the condition is met. Based upon this, you're going to do something until, and what you're going to do are these tasks in here. Obviously, and then the end of the structure is the word loop. In Visual Studio, or Visual Basic, I should say, loop is how you end structures, the do loops, okay? Not the for next loops, that's something different. We'll cover that here in a second, but the do loops is how we do this, okay? So do loop, that's what we mean there. The loop says this. How does this work? It's going to check to see the condition. So if I sit back and give you an example here, do until count is greater than 10. If I come into the structure, okay, if I come into the structure and the count is, say, 0, the count is not greater than 10, and then I'm going to go inside the loop and actually do the work. This one says do a message box.show, showing the count, and then I'm going to increment the count. Okay, because we want to make sure that whatever our condition is out here, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but whatever our condition is, it has to be able to be met sooner or later, or we're going to fall into this little thing called an infinite loop, meaning we'll never come out of the loop. Once I increment, and so then what will happen is this. So as soon as I'll come here, I'll do this, I'll hit loop, and I come immediately back up. That's how this structure works. It comes immediately back up, ask the question again, is it greater than 10? Well, we just added 1 to it, so now my count is 1. I keep going through it. So I keep going through as many times, in this case 10 times, right? And as soon as my count becomes greater than 10, it will fall out of the loop. It will not go back in here and do it one more time. It immediately falls out and goes to the next line after the word loop. That's how a do until works. Does that make sense? Okay. Within the structure, obviously you can have structures within structures. You can have conditional statements, a conditional structure if you like. You can have another loop if you like, a loop within a loop. Very common. You guys will actually play around with those a little bit later on. And so, so you can have all 3 structures can go within a structure. Just make sure the innermost loop lines up with the innermost do. And of course, Visual Studio helps you do that. Does that make sense? Okay, so you can have anything you want in here programming wise. It could be 2 lines of code or it could be 1,000 lines of code based upon what you're trying to do. All right, do while, you see these more prevalent in other languages versus do until. Do while says do while some condition exists, okay? So do while x equals y, or do while int count is less than 10. All right, so let's look at this. Here's what I mean by this. Instead of writing do until int count is greater than or equal greater than 10, I can say do while int count is less than or equal to 10. Almost the exact same thing, just written a little bit differently. And that's how that loop works there. Which one is correct? There's really no one that's correct or incorrect. You can use either one of them, especially in this course, and what's preference to you. Like I said, you probably won't find a do until in other languages. So maybe you want to get used to the do while. So when you go to other languages, you're already comfortable with that type of looping. Okay? Either one is fine by me. Okay? The infinite loop, as I mentioned before, it's very important that you got to do something within the loop that's going to change the condition. Meaning, if I sat back and I commented out the int count plus equals 1 here, and I never increment that count, this loop, so int count will never be greater than 10 if it comes in, say, starting at 1. And it'll just loop and loop and loop and loop. You guys might experience that. How do you know you're experiencing it? Well, you press submit and all of a sudden nothing happens. It's just staring at you. More than likely, you're in an infinite loop. You probably want to end your debugging, go in and fix it. Life is not that bad. But that's how you know you're in an infinite loop. But all of a sudden, you press submit and it just kind of nothing happens. But it's still running, but nothing happens. More than likely, you're in an infinite loop. How to avoid these? You mess it up a couple times, you'll probably learn how to avoid them. But for the most part, how do you avoid these? Make sure that whatever your condition is will change eventually in this case. So if I undo this one right here, obviously, I'm sorry, if I undo this int count, okay, maybe uncomment it, then I'll be fine. It's going to increment, and at some point in time, int count will be greater than 10, and I will fall out of the loop. Make sense? Pretty simple, right? The for next loop is another way to write a loop that is for the iterative structure. It is used when a loop needs to perform a certain amount of times. So for whatever reason, if you want to go 10 times and you know your program wants to do it 10 times, you will basically can use a for next loop. It's kind of nice because in this case, it does a couple things for you. In this case, let's go through how this works. This says for int count equal to 1. What this is doing is initializing int count. It's still a variable, and I'm making it equal to 1. Okay, and I'm going to go to 10. And as soon as it hits 10, it's going to be fine. It's going to do it. In this case, it's going to do the message box, and then it hits the next. When it hits the next, it goes back up. Automatically increments one time. Okay? So for next loop, you don't have to worry about incrementing your counter or whatever you're trying to do. It automatically deals with incrementing by itself. So you don't have to add one to it. It will do it for you. As soon as it hits 10, it will fall out of the loop and go to the next line past the next in your code. Okay, so as I said here, two unique items about this loop. It automatically initializes the count. Okay, no dim statement is required. And it automatically increments int count. You literally don't have to dim this thing. This right here automatically does two things. Establishes the variable, and it automatically initializes it. Pretty cool. And it automatically increments. So it's a powerful little loop, okay, in this case. So for int count 1 to 10, go from there. There's going to be these unique times, and I want you to keep this in the back of your head, maybe not so much for this week, but the coming up weeks, these unique times where you may want to increment more than one, meaning instead of incrementing your counter by 1, maybe you want to increment it by 2. If you want to do that, so you add this little clause called step 2. Does that make sense? If you want to, so every time it goes through the loop, instead, maybe you want to pull out all the, I don't know, even numbers. Maybe, you create a little loop that does that, and this is how you do it. Okay, you basically do step 2 by the next clause. Okay, and you put step 2. This means instead of incrementing by 1, increment by 2 every time it goes through it. I put step 3. Instead of incrementing by 1, I would increment by 3 every time it goes through it. Have I used that before? Not very often, but I do recall doing so here and there in my career. When I say here and there, maybe once or twice, and after writing billions of loops. So not very often, but that's how you would do it, okay? You can actually increment backwards. If I wanted to increment backwards, I could have a -1. So it's maybe I'm doing something really weird, and I don't know, I want to count down instead of count up. I can do that by stepping -1. Again, the default is incrementing by a +1, but if you wanted to step down, -1. Can you remember that? I'm kind of foreshadowing a problem that's going to come up one of these days for you, that you may need to decrement your count versus increment your count. Okay? Just keep it in the back of your head. Okay? So that's how you do it. Pre-test and post-test loops. All loops that we have discussed so far have been pre-test loops. Pre-test loops test the condition, and based on the results, it either executes the task within the loop or it exits the loop. Meaning, when you come in, it's going to test that condition. And based upon if you're writing it's a do loop or a do while, as long as the condition is either met or it still exists, it will go into the loop and do the task within the loop. or it will fall out. But it's going to do it first. It's going to assess it before it does anything, and that's called a pretest loops. Most loops are pretest. So this is a pretest loop here. Once again, going in, count is 10. It's going to say do while int count is less than 10. Well, count is 10. What's going to happen with this? This is a do while. So it's already 10. This says do while int count is less than 10. So thus, it's going to fall out of the loop immediately. Okay, it will not go in here and do it one time. It tests it and then it falls out. Okay, remember that, very important. Okay, if you find a situation where you need to at least execute all the tasks within your loop at least once, you may want to write a post-test loop. And this is how you do this. Okay, do message box show int count plus 1 loop int until int count is greater than 1. Easy for me to say. Okay, here's what's going to happen in this case. If int count is equal to 1 coming in, it's not going to test it first. It's going to do whatever in the loop first, then test it. And then it will say if int count is greater than 1, I had 1, I incremented by 1. In this case, I would fall out. I don't do post-test loops very often, probably about as often as I add that step clause in the for next, but they're there. It's something to think about. Do you need to be able to, can you get around writing a post-test loop? Yeah, you could. You could basically put, if you wanted to do, let's go back a couple. What could I do here to avoid a post-test loop if I wanted to do messagebox.show at least one time? I could probably take that messagebox.show and put it right before the loop, make sure it runs one time, then test the condition. It's the same thing as doing this. Does that make sense? These are those little extras that about looping that you kind of want to know about. Every language, once again, is unique to it. Not every language, I think, has a post-test to it. You'll find that out once you get to those other languages, but this one does, and that's how you do it. Okay, and it's okay, even though this one, and go from there. Same thing we just kind of went through. All right, so that is your introduction to the iterative structure. Yay, you. You're probably looking at this and saying, well, those aren't too bad. Those are pretty easy. Well, the fun part starts trying to figure out when to use them and how to use them logically, okay? And so once again, most of the times it's pretty self-evident how to do so because you're dealing with looping through arrays and looping through result sets and databases. That's going to be 98% of your loops. But for the next, what we're going to do this week and maybe a little bit of next is go outside and kind of have some fun with some different type of looping programs and figure out how to take things that you would do over and over and over and over again in a program and stick it within a loop to make it really, really easy to use. Okay? So we'll get started with that in the next video that goes through our weekly example.